Federal interest payments are an exponential train wreck. We're going to have to talk about this because, folks, look, the Federal Reserve is either going to defend the bond market or defend the dollar. You got to know which they're going to do because your future prosperity really depends on it. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Martenson of Peak Prosperity. Today, we're going to be discussing this ridiculous-looking chart here, which is when we're looking at comparing in purple the federal interest payments compared to black, which is, well, the out-of-control defense budget, which, you know, is has anything to do with defense, like, I don't know, like Jeffrey Dahmer has to do with, you know, safe food handling tips. We got to talk about this, but first we got to go to something where we have to understand the basic background of this. So let's look at this. I wrote here, well, let's look at this. Asashis Joshi said, in just 6 years, from 2016 to 2021, the people on Earth have consumed over 75% of what we did over the entire 20th century. That means in just 6 years, we've consumed the same amount, 3/4 of the same amount that was consumed over an entire century. How can this be? This is overconsumption they're blaming it on. So it's just, we're just consuming more. It's just how it is. And here you can see, let me shrink this down a little so it fits. Wrong way. Yeah. Here you can see everything we've consumed in an entire century here. And pull this over a tiny bit so we can see all of it. I guess this is what? Tons of crap. Metric tons. Yeah, 600 billion, 700 billion metric tons. This is how much metric tons of stuff we have consumed in just 6 years. Now, how can this be? How can it be that we consumed 75% in 6 years of what took an entire century to consume? Well, I wrote here because this is how exponential functions work. And if you know, you know. So for those of you who haven't familiarized yourself with this, we should go now to this, which is I created something called the Crash Course a number of years ago. And it's still one of my best pieces of work. If you like my work, you're going to want to see the Crash Course. Completely free. I decided the whole world needed to see it for free, so I produced it, put it out there, and it sits there. And it's every bit as good as any of the COVID reporting I did. It really will change how you think. Now, here's an example. This is just 3 minutes of material. Once you understand this function, this will change everything about how you see the world once you internalize it. So let's listen in.
The presentation is to help you understand the power of compounding. If something, such as a population, oil demand, a money supply, anything, steadily increases in size as a proportion of its current size, you get a graph that looks like this. A hockey stick. Said more simply, if something is increasing over time on a percentage basis, it's growing exponentially. Using an example drawn from a magnificent paper by Dr. Albert Bartlett, let me illustrate the power of compounding to you. Suppose I had a magic eyedropper and I placed a single drop of water in the middle of your left hand. The magic part is that this drop of water is going to double in size every minute. At first, nothing seems to be happening, but by the end of a minute, that tiny drop is now the size of 2 tiny drops. After another minute, you now have a little pool of water that is slightly smaller in diameter than a dime sitting in your hand. After 6 minutes, you now have a blob of water that would just fill a thimble. Now, suppose we take our magic eyedropper to Fenway Park, and right at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, we place a magic drop way down there on the pitcher's mound. To make this really interesting, suppose that the park is watertight and that you are handcuffed to one of the very highest bleacher seats. My question to you is this. How long do you have to escape from the handcuffs? Days? Weeks? Months? Years? How long would that take? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. The answer is you have until 12:49 on that same day to figure out how you're going to get out of those handcuffs. In less than 50 minutes, our modest little drop of water has managed to completely fill Fenway Park. Now let me ask you this. At what time of the day would Fenway Park still be 93% empty space? And how many of you would realize the severity of your predicament? Any guesses? The answer is 12:44. If you were squirming in your bleacher seat, waiting for help to arrive, by the time the field is covered with less than 5 feet of water, you would now have less than 5 minutes left to get free. And that right there illustrates one of the key features of compound growth. The one thing that I want you to take away from all of this, with exponential functions, the action really only heats up in the last few moments. We sat in our seat for 44 minutes, Nothing much seemed to be happening, and then in 5 minutes, bang, the whole place was full. This example is loosely based on a wonderful paper by Dr. Albert Bartlett that clearly and cleanly describes this process of compounding, which you can find in our essential reading section. Dr. Bartlett said, "The greatest shortcoming of the human race is the inability to understand the exponential function." And he's absolutely right. With this understanding, you'll begin to understand the urgency I feel. There's simply not a lot of maneuvering room once you hop on the vertical portion of a compound graph. Time gets short.
I'll leave that there. So that's the process, is that at the end, exponential functions speed up. That's it. That's all I want you to take away from the exponential function piece. But it harkens to this idea of Hemingway was asked, how did you go broke? And his response was, slowly, then all at once. That's an exponential function. It proceeds slowly and then all at once. We are at the all at once stage of this. Things are going to be moving very, very quickly. If you find it difficult to keep up with the news, with events, it's because we're at the tail end of multiple converging exponential functions. Our money system is growing exponentially. Our problems are compounding exponentially. Our extraction of resources is growing exponentially. The loss of species is happening exponentially. Everything's happening exponentially. The problem is we're linear. We're humans. We can calculate a fastball. It's amazing, but we can't calculate what it means to slip on our ice on the front stoop of our house in the middle of winter or something like that. So you'll see like the world's best, absolute best baseball stars who can calculate in the blink of an eye how to swing a bat will still crash and burn like the rest of us on a stoop. Why? Because, well, you fall is a square function, right? 9.8 meters per second squared, not a linear function. If gravity was a linear function, we'd be able to calculate it, and falls would be a lot less dangerous. But it's not. It's an exponential function. We are not equipped to deal with exponential functions on an intuitive basis. That's why I put forward that hopefully somewhat intuitive or more embodied stadium example. Okay, so why do I come back to this? That's because, and now we've got to come back to this chart here. Not that one. Not that one. Not that one. Not that one. That one. So look at these charts. Look at this interest payment. That, my friends, is an out of control exponential function and is going to go like this. Whoosh, things get quick from here. If you have one takeaway from this, though, one thing that I need you to understand is that the Fed now has one choice to make. It either is going to defend the bond market or it's going to defend the currency. Either the dollar takes it in the shorts, which we will call inflation, but it's really an act of policy to diminish the value of that currency, because the alternative is to have your bond market crash. And the bond market is sort of the lifeline feeder pipe that keeps the whole federal government able to do what it's doing, which is, weaponizing the Department of Justice and shipping arms to Ukraine and doing whatever it's doing, right? So it's got its own features and functions of what it thinks is important. But in order to keep doing those things, it's going to need the bond market to remain intact. And so that's what the Fed is going to defend 10 times out of 10. What does that mean? Okay, it's going to play out like this. When I say defend the bond market, right now, the federal interest payments are exploding, right? We've just seen that. See that? The only way to make those federal interest payments stop exploding like that is for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. Now, how do you lower interest rates? Well, unless they pass a law that says interest rates can only be 2% on 10-year bonds or something like that, unless they pass a law that says they do not have to pay back or remit the interest payments that they promised, unless they break the markets in some fundamental way or break the contracts in some fundamental way, the only way for the Federal Reserve to lower those interest rates is to go out into the market and buy a lot of bonds. Because, as you know, in the seesaw relationship of bond prices and bond yields, in order to make the bond yields go down, the bond prices have to go up. How do you make bond prices go up? You buy them. Well, what if there aren't enough buyers? Well, then the Fed steps in. They start buying them. How does the Fed buy them? It prints money out of thin air and buys them. Wait a minute. If it's printing money out of thin air, isn't that diluting all the other outstanding money out there? It sure is. That's called inflation. That's called sacrificing the dollar to save the bond market. Will the Fed choose to sacrifice the bond market potentially? Not a chance in the world. When the bond market breaks, the whole system breaks. The Fed is here to protect the system for the bankers, of the bankers, by the bankers. And one of the things the bankers like to do is parasitize the interest output, that is the productive labor of all of the humans in their little sphere of influence. So in the United States, you go to work, you get up, you drive, you suffer through all the traffic jams, you have to pay your mortgage on your house, interest payments on your car payment, interest payments on your credit card, interest on the federal government. The reason your taxes are going to go up is because the federal government has massive spending problem, but instead of containing that, it's going to find a way to tax you more. That's why we just saw Team Biden proposed massive tax increases across everybody recently in an election year. Kind of a weird thing, right? Okay, so once you understand this dynamic and you understand that the Fed is now caught in an exponential trap, it has only one of two choices. It's either going to defend the bond market, which means it's going to kill the dollar, or it's going to save the dollar and kill the bond market. Either of these things has not good outcomes for you, the listener, but there are things you can do to protect yourself. There are many things you can and should be doing right now. You have an early warning on this. You are handcuffed like all of us to those bleacher seats. It's 5 minutes left in the story. The question is, what are you going to do about it? So please get prepared. Do what you can to be prepared. That's what I do back at Peak Prosperity. And I've got a lot more. Of course, this is a scouting report. Part 2 of this is back for my subscribers at Peak Prosperity. But I hope you learned something. That's how I roll. I don't just provide news. I hopefully provide context to make sense of the news. That's my job as your information scout. With that, thanks very much for listening. See you next time. And please get ready for what's coming.